Good morning. Last time we were talking about Leibniz's principles of identity. So remember there were two main principles which could be put together. One was the principle that if x is identical with y, then x and y have the very same qualities, and the other was the flip side of that, that if x and y have the very same qualities, then x is identical with y. So the first principle is known as the indiscernibility of identicals, that an identical x and y are indiscernible, they have the very same qualities. And the second principle is the identity of indiscernibles, which says that things that have the same qualities or are indiscernible are therefore identical. Some have thought that by conjoining the two together, you get a definition of identity, that x is identical with y, if and only if x and y share the very same qualities. Well, we saw there were some serious issues anyway with the principle that things that have the very same qualities must be identical. In terms of possible worlds that contain two or more objects that have exactly the same qualities, where the objects are symmetrically arranged, so there's no difference in the relations that they stand into to anything else as well. Today I wanted to start off by talking about a related principle, which is sometimes confused with the very plausible, I think, principle of the indiscernibility of identicals, that identical things share the same qualities. And that's the principle of unqualified substitution. I mentioned this at the end of the last lecture. So what it says is that if you have two singular terms, and singular terms, for example, are things, linguistic terms like names and definite descriptions. So Barack Obama would be a singular term. It's a name. And then the President of the United States would be a definite description, a description that has unique application if it applies to anything at all. So when this principle talks about singular terms, it's talking about terms like names and definite descriptions. If you construe the notion of a name broadly, it would include not only proper names like Barack Obama, but also demonstrative terms and pronouns, things like this and that and he and she, and so on. But the main two categories are proper names and definite descriptions. So it says that if two singular terms designate one and the same thing, so designate identicals, then you can replace either one by the other in any sentence in which it occurs without changing the truth value of the sentence. In Latin, this is salva veritate, that is, while saving or preserving truth. So the truth value won't shift according to this principle. If you substitute a proper name for another proper name that names the identical thing, or a definite description for another definite description that definitely describes the very same thing, the truth value will hold. For example, if you have the sentence, say, Obama is the president, or Obama is a name, so understanding that as Barack Obama. So then you could substitute a co-referring singular term for that, and the truth value would stay the same according to that. So what would be a co-referring singular term? some other term that refers to Obama, right? So, like what, Malia's father? Malia's father is the president of the U.S. So if this was true, then this would be true. The truth value wouldn't change. If this was false, then, like we said, Barack Obama is the vice president of the United States, that would be false. And then if we said Malia's father is the vice president, substituting, that would also be false. So the idea is it has the same truth value as the one you start with. If the only change you make is you substitute one co-referring singular term for another, that is a term that designates the identical object as the name you started out with. And it seems like so long as you stick to examples like these, this principle is always going to work. Like Abraham Lincoln grew up in a log cabin, right? And the 16th president of the United States grew up in a log cabin. The 16th president of the United States is identical with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the name, co-refers with the description, the 16th president of the United States. So you start out with the truth, it preserves the truth, salva veritate. So co-referring singular terms can be intersubstituted for one another. In any sentence in which they occur, salva veritate. That's the fancy way of saying it. Preserving the truth or saving the truth of the sentence. And you can see, like, this is sort of a consequence of this principle that identical things have the same qualities, right? So all you're doing is changing the name, but you still have the same things, so the sentence ascribing a quality to it should stay either true or false, depending on the original truth value of the sentence you started out with. Right? So that's the idea. Notoriously, though, there seem to be lots of special cases in which the principle fails, and so that's the interesting thing. You might think this is sort of a linguistic counterpart to the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals principle, and that since that principle is universally true, that if X is identical with Y, X and Y have the same qualities, that this would always be true. But this one's not always true. There are various classes of counterexamples to the substitution principle, which is an interesting thing. So let's look at some of those cases. Okay. Okay, so one kind of case is going to be where you have a sentence occurring within the scope of a propositional or psychological attitude, like knowledge or belief. So say we have suppose we have Oedipus wanted to kill the masked man. So this is from the famous Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex. So Oedipus is represented by O, wanted to kill the masked man. The masked man's identical with his father. though Oedipus tragically is completely unaware of that. So that means the masked man, the definite description, the masked man co-refers with the singular term O's father. So O's father is identical with the masked man, which makes the singular terms co-refer, the masked man and O's father. So if we substitute, so this one's true, right? O wanted to kill the masked man. And then if we substitute O's father for the masked man, which says we can do, we're going to get O wanted to kill O's father, which is, O wanted to kill his father, which is false. He would have been horrified and was later horrified to find out that he'd done that, and that was partly why he blinded himself, among other tragic things that he unknowingly did. Right? So we get this false thing that O wanted to kill his father. Yeah, so you can see wanted is a psychological attitude, so the principle fails there. It would be similar for things like belief and knowledge and so on. So O knew that the masked man was standing in front of him, right? The masked man was identical with his father, but he didn't know that his father was standing. So the original would be true. We substitute the co-referring singular term, his father, and he doesn't know that his father is standing in front of him, even though he knows that the masked man is standing in front of him and they're identical with one another. Right. This has a certain relationship to the distinction between, that we talked about earlier, between de dicto and de re, psychological attitudes. But I won't go into that again right now, anyway. Okay, so contexts of knowledge and belief and desire and so on. These are all so-called propositional attitudes, psychological attitudes which can be directed upon a proposition or sentence which has a truth value of either true or false, and in which singular terms may occur. So that's why we get these examples. So that's one category of counterexamples. Second category is going to be modalities. And remember, we can consider belief to be a kind of modality, like what's known as a doxastic modality. Greek doxa means belief or opinion, or an epistemic modality in the case of knowledge. There are also, of course, alethic or logical modalities like necessity and possibility and so on. So we get these kinds of examples here also, where you can have a modal statement with a given truth value, you substitute a co-referring term, and the truth value is not preserved. So necessarily, say, 7 is identical with 7. That's true. The number 7 is identical with the number 7. And 7 is identical with the number of continents. So the singular term 7, the name 7, and the definite description, the number of continents, co-refer. So according to this principle, we should be able to substitute in the original for one of the 7s and get a necessarily true statement. truth value should be preserved. If we do that, though, we're going to get necessarily the number of continents. If we substitute it for the first one, the number of continents is 7, which is false. It's not necessary that there be 7 continents. 2 could combine, and then you'd have 6. Or some might break up, and then you'd have 8, and so on. At one time, there was just one continent. Right, they're all joined together into a big jigsaw. I think it was called like Gowana Land or something like that, way back hundreds of millions of years ago. So necessarily, the number of continents is 7, which is false. Right, so isn't that interesting? Right? So the principle fails in these contexts of modalities, in particular doxastic or belief and knowledge modalities, and logical modalities as well. Okay, a third kind. So you might think you could save this just by making some exceptions here, right? Except for, right? But when the lists get very long, it gets to be like really tedious. I've got this principle and it works. It's, but there's like thousands of counterexamples to it that I could list here. So I have a true principle except for these exceptions. If you get too many exceptions, it becomes a weaker and weaker insight that such a principle might be true. It's unclear that it's really a general principle anymore. Third kind of case is actually case of, I guess what you might call indirect discourse, talk about language. So things that are in quotation marks. So when you use quotation marks, it doesn't work. Co-referring terms don't necessarily, for example, have the same number of letters in them. So if you put quotation marks around a term, right? So say we have Obama, so it's not talking about the word Obama, but it's still a singular term occurring. So Obama has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters. And Obama is identical to the President of the United States. Right? So that means a singular term Obama co-refers with a singular term the President of the United States. Which means if we substitute, we're going to get that the phrase, the definite description, the President of the United States has 5 letters, which is false, even though the original one is true. So this is true, but this one's going to be false, that the phrase, the definite description or phrase, the President of the USA has 5 letters. It's actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20 letters. Right? So that's a problem. As it says, right, unqualified substitution. So you can replace either name by the other in any sentence in which it occurs. That's the problem. Well, but not if it occurs within the scope of belief or within the scope of a logical modality or within quotation marks or... You might think, with those 3 exceptions, it's still sort of interesting that you can substitute in other contexts. But there are even more exceptions. So let's see. So suppose you have a sentence, Melania's husband sleeps with her. Melania is Donald Trump's wife. Okay, so this is true. And then we have that Melania's husband is identical with Ivanka's father. Okay. Ivanka is Donald Trump's daughter. So then substituting the co-referring term, Ivanka's father for Melania's husband, we're going to get that Ivanka's father sleeps with her, which is false. So I don't know how we would rule this one out. So it seems like the problems are many with this unqualified substitution principle. So substitution is not unqualified. many qualifications. These are some of the main ones, but there may be others as well. All right, so this principle shouldn't be confused. This linguistic principle of substitution shouldn't be confused with the metaphysical principle about identity, which says that if X is identical with Y, X and Y share the same properties. Though it appears at first blush to be a kind of linguistic counterpart to it, but it only holds up in limited classes of cases. Once sort of you move from discourse about things to discourse about language, language can function in all kinds of ways. Okay, so now back to our principle of the indiscernibility of identicals, which we say seems pretty solid, that if X is identical with Y, then X has every property Y has, and Y has every property X has. This principle, believe it or not, has been challenged on a number of grounds, so I want to go through two of the main arguments that have been given against that principle. People who argue that X and Y can be identical but have different properties, even though they're one and the same thing. Okay, so one of the arguments has to do with things changing their properties over time. So you have this circumstance that a thing at one time could exist at a later time, but have different properties at those times. So then wouldn't that seem to put some strain on the idea that if X and Y are identical, they share the same properties, because you have a single thing, X, which has different properties at different times. So an example could be John and my childhood playmate. So suppose John is this guy who's 6 feet tall and has a beard. And John was also my childhood playmate, but he was like 3.5 feet tall, completely beardless. Right? So So we can get this argument going here. So premise one, John is identical with the one I played with when I was 4 years old. Two, but John is over 6 feet tall and has a beard. Three, however, the one I played with was about 4 feet tall and had no beard. So the one I played with was about 4 feet tall and had no beard. And then you have, as your fourth premise, if, well, for any x and y, if x is identical with y, then x has every property y has, and every property x has. So that's our principle of the indiscernibility of identicals. That identical things are indiscernible and have exactly the same qualities. So it appears that 1 through 4 constitute an inconsistent quartet, right? John's identical with the one I played with, so if x is John and y is the one I played with, then by 4 they should have the same properties, but they don't. John's over 6 feet tall and has a beard, and the one that I played with was about 4 feet tall and had no beard. So that's a difference in properties. So what are we to do? So this has led some philosophers have rejected 4. Okay. Others have rejected 1. They claim that John's not actually identical to the one I played with when I was 4 years old. That is, they deny the principle that a thing can maintain its identity through time if it changes. They might hearken back to the ancient pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, who said that the world is constantly in flux and one can never step into the same river twice because it's constantly changing and the waters are flowing on. We have a different river at every moment. So we might have a different person at every moment, and John and my childhood playmate wouldn't be the same thing on that response to the argument. Some have supported that by saying that actually what we have in the case of John and my childhood playmate is what might be called different temporal slices. So you might say, one, strictly speaking, one isn't true. The thing that we're calling John is just that momentary slice of what exists there at that moment, say today or yesterday. And the one I played with the one I played with when I was 4 years old, that one was just that momentary slice of what existed there at that moment, say 20 years ago or something, whatever. In my case, much more than that. So then we would deny one and say we don't actually have identity. We just have two different things which, it's true, do form a continuous sequence, which might be called a temporal worm, right? A worm made of many segments, each of which is very brief. But strictly speaking, on that interpretation, we would have to say one is just false. And then we'd get out of the paradox that way. And we could still hold on to the identity, to the indiscernibility of identicals. Right? On the other hand, if we hold on to one and say things do persist through time and do change their properties, then it looks like we'd have to reject four. Right? We'd have to say identicals aren't indiscernible. They can have different properties at different times. It doesn't seem like we can reject either 2 or 3, though. Obviously, John is now over 6 feet tall and has a beard, and the one I played with was about 4 feet tall and had no beard. So we can't reject those. So it's got to be either 1 or 4 that we reject. So which one should we reject? Do we retain our identity over time? Well, in favor, we could say, look, I remember all kinds of things that I did, and that was me. Like I remember last Thursday I came to class, and Professor Rosencrantz talked about Leibniz's law, and so surely that was me. I still exist. So that would favor retaining one, and then we'd have to get rid of the indiscernibility of identicals somehow, right? So I guess that would be my argument. Anyone have any thoughts on that? No. Okay, so we're all in agreement that we don't want to get rid of the data that people and animals and many other things can endure through time, persist, continue to exist even though they may change in some way. Just like Descartes in the Meditations talked about the piece of wax being the same substance even though at one moment it was solid, after it was brought near the candle became softer and fluid. Still the same wax, just in a different form because of different conditions. Right, but this principle's self-evident, right? That if X is identical with Y, then X and Y have the same properties. So how do we cope with this? Well, one solution might be to modify the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals in what I think is a fairly minor way in order to account for the element or aspect of time, so as to accommodate things being identical through a period of time when it undergoes change. One way we could do that is to say for any time t and any x and y, if x is identical to y at t, then at t, x has every property y has, and y has every property x has. That seems true, and that seems like it's consistent with 1 through 3. Because John and my childhood playmate, at any time you pick, any particular time t, they have the same properties at that time. That is, 55 years ago, whatever, right? The one who is now has a beard and is 6 feet tall. Back then, he was short and beardless. Right? So he has exactly the same properties as the one I played with when I was 4 years old. Right? And the one I played with when I was 4 years old, who was short and beardless, now at this later time, T2, right, is 6 feet tall, over 6 feet tall, and has a beard. So depending on what time you put in there, the x and the y, the John and the one that I played with when I was 4, will have the same properties at that time for whichever time you choose to pick. So we could say for any time t and any x and y, if x is identical with y, well, this is to be, we'll say, if x is identical with y at t, then at t, x has every property y has, and y has every property x has. So it looks like we need to slightly revise our principle of the indiscernibility of identicals. And now it'll be consistent with things retaining their identity through time as they change. So, problem solved. To me, that seems a better solution than saying that one is false. Okay, now there's another objection to the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals. All right, so this one, it's an interesting fact of astronomy, which wasn't always known, that the object in the evening sky, known as the evening star in ordinary parlance, is actually identical with the object that's referred to as the morning star. So the morning star and the evening star, actually they're not stars. The evening star is Venus, seen in the evening, and the morning star is Venus, seen in the morning. At first, people didn't know that, like back in ancient times. Eventually, astronomers discovered that it was Venus in both cases. So anyway, so the morning star is identical with the evening star. 2, now we have our Mr. Smith. Smith believes that the morning star is visible in the morning. Smith does not believe that the evening star is visible in the morning, no, because he doesn't know. Same. He doesn't put the two together in any way, even though more advanced science would tell us that it's the same object appearing both times. So he doesn't think the evening star is visible in the morning. He thinks it's just visible in the evening. So therefore, the argument concludes at this stage, 4, that the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. And this comes from 1 and 2. Supposed to be a consequence of 1 and 2. From this and this, that the morning star is the evening star. So this implies that the morning star exists, basically. And that together with Smith's believing that the morning star is visible in the morning, from those two, from the existence of the morning star plus Smith's beliefs that the morning star is visible in the morning, it's inferred from 1 and 2 that the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, which may be a plausible inference. Okay. Now we add another premise. So the line tells us that we're inferring, but if we just write, so another assumption. The 5th premise of the argument is the assumption that the evening star is not believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. This is inferred from 1 and 3, that the evening star does exist since it's identical with the morning star, but Smith does not believe that the evening star is visible in the morning, so it's inferred from those two that the evening star is not believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, even though the morning star is believed. Then it's inferred here, 6, the morning star has a property that the evening star lacks. Remember, they're identical, though, right? So given the indiscernibility of identicals, one of them shouldn't have a property that the other one doesn't have yet. The morning star, according to this inference, has a property that the evening star lacks, namely what? Being believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. Namely, the property of being believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. And this is inferred from 4 and 5. That the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, and the evening star is not believed by Smith to be visible. That one of them, the morning star has got a property the evening star lacks, despite their identity. So 7, the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals is false from 1 and 6. So that's the final conclusion of this somewhat paradoxical argument. The principle of the indiscernibility of identicals is false. From 1 and 6. 1 says they're identical, 6 says they have different properties. Therefore, the principle that identicals have the very same qualities is false. So there's your argument. So what shall we say here? Should we reject the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals, or is there some false premise or some false inference in this argument? I guess one could try to say that 1 is false. I think that'd be pretty desperate, that the morning star really isn't identical to the evening star. After all, it seems to be a scientific fact that it is. And surely Smith does believe that the morning star is visible in the morning, and he doesn't believe that the evening star is visible in the morning. Those are just assumptions that clearly may be true, depending on Smith, but we can assume them. So then we get the 4, that the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. Well, that seems right. From 1 and 2. And if 4 and 5 are both true, then it surely does follow that the morning star has a property that the evening star lacks, namely being believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, if we grant 4 and 5. 4 we established from 1 and 2. We haven't yet discussed whether 5 really follows from 1 and 3. If you get to 6, though, then you get to 7, right? So it looks like the only hope of blocking the argument that isn't totally desperate is to question whether 5 really follows from 1 and 3. Does it follow that the evening star isn't believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, given the existence of the evening star, and given that Smith doesn't believe that the evening star is visible in the morning? Does it follow that the evening star is not believed by Smith to be visible in the morning? I would argue that it doesn't follow, because we'd be inferring a de re belief statement from a de dicto belief statement, where, in fact, the inference does not logically follow. So the claim is going to be that it doesn't follow from 1 and 3 that 5 here is true. Because, after all, the evening star is identical with the morning star, right? So if the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, which we already argued here, then we should be able to substitute the evening star for that. It should also be true that the evening star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning. Even though he doesn't believe that the evening star is visible in the morning, it's still that very same star that's believed by him to be visible in the morning. De re belief is relational. And it doesn't imply that the person knows or believes that the object has the property in question under every description of it that you might have. He must ascribe that property to it under some description, like the evening star or whatever, or the morning star. In this case, he believes it under the description the morning star. In believing that the morning star is visible in the morning, the evening star is also believed by him to be visible in the morning, even though he doesn't believe that the morning star is visible in the evening, or that the evening star is visible in the morning. It's still true that that evening star is the object of his belief, and he ascribes to it the property of being visible in the morning, without having any clue that it's the evening star that's visible in the morning. So, given what we've said earlier about the failure of de dicto belief statements to imply de re statements, see, de re belief statements actually ascribe a property to an object, that object is the object to which a given person attributes a certain quality. He may attribute the quality to it under a particular description without attributing the property to it under another description of which he's unaware that the object satisfies. But the property gets attributed to the object nonetheless, and therefore the object is believed by him to be visible in the morning without his knowing that that object is visible in the morning. He thinks this is visible in the evening, but that's a mistake. Still doesn't mean that 5 can be inferred from 1 and 3. So we can say that 5 doesn't follow from 1 and 3, so the argument is invalid and unsound. And in fact, I think 5 is false. 5 is false, that is, if 4 is true. If we're willing to say that the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, if we're willing to say that, that is, if Smith's epistemic relation to the morning star is strong enough, based on 1 and 2, for us to conclude that it's believed by him, that he actually ascribes a property to that object, then, I think that's a not unreasonable view. Then it's also going to be true that the evening star has that same property attributed to it by him, because it is the evening star. And if he ascribes that property to the morning star, he's ascribed it to the evening star as well, though unknowingly in this case. Just like Oedipus would have killed his father even though he was only thinking he killed the masked man. Right? He didn't know that they were identical. But in killing the masked man, he killed his father. Right? So it's the inference of 5 from 1 and 3. So the argument is unsound. Either 3 and either 4 and 5 are both false, or 5 doesn't follow from 1 and 3. If 4 is true, 5 is going to be false. The evening star will be believed by Smith because it's the same object. De re belief's relational and actually puts a property, gives a property to a thing that relates the believer to the object. A de dicto belief need not do that. You could have a de dicto belief where the object doesn't even exist, like the belief that the tooth fairy put money under my pillow last night. That's a de dicto belief. Doesn't follow from that there is a tooth fairy. So a de dicto belief need not entail an actual property, that an actual property is had by some object. But a de re belief always does. But once the object is there, if you ascribe the property to it under some conceptual representation that you have of it, that object has that property under all descriptions. So another way of putting it is that the principle of unqualified substitution that we talked about earlier fails for de dicto beliefs, but holds for de re beliefs. Right? So if you have the morning star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, and the morning star is identical to the evening star, then we can also say by the principle of substitution that it's true that the evening star is believed by Smith to be visible in the morning, because we're talking there about a statement like Obama is president or something like that. It's just a property being ascribed to an object, as opposed to a statement about what somebody believes in terms of the proposition that they believe. In those kinds of cases, there's no direct connection that even implies the existence of the object that you believe to exist. It may not exist. So that's the way out of this conundrum, I think, is to see that 5 cannot be logically proven from 1 and 3, even if 4 follows from 1 and 2, which plausibly it does. One could question even that. I mean, some think you need more than just a general belief and the existence of an object for that object to be ascribed or attributed a property by a given person. They think you actually have to have some fairly intimate knowledge of the thing before that would occur. And one could quibble about whether Smith has that kind of intimate connection with the evening star and the morning stars, since he doesn't seem to know too much about them. But, but that's an open question. And many just go with the very weak condition, so long as the object exists and so long as you have a belief containing a description definite enough to pick out that object in a singular way, that object then acquires the property of being believed by you to have the property. Others require more stringent conditions. But, in any event, if the morning star is the object of Smith's belief, so is the evening star. They're the same thing. All right. There are some additional puzzles about identity that we could turn to in our remaining time today. Consider a consider a piece of metal or a hunk of metal. So the hunk of metal was a statue, say, on Monday, like a piece of bronze. And then imagine that it's the metal is melted and refashioned in a smelting oven. So the hunk of metal was a vase on Tuesdays. And suppose on Wednesday the hunk of metal is neither the statue nor the vase. It's just like a blob. Right? On Wednesday. So from this we can get that the hunk of metal is identical with the statue, right? That's on Monday, the statue. It's like some statue, right? Like of winged Mercury in Florence or something like that. The hunk's also identical to the vase by the same reasoning on Tuesday. So on Monday we have this object, the statue, right? And it's identical to the hunk of metal. And then on Tuesday we've got this object, the vase. It's identical to the hunk of metal. But the trouble is on Wednesday it's neither a statue nor a vase. So then is the vase identical to the statue? And so would be. So we might want to say the statue is not identical to the vase. That would be bad, though, because remember we had this principle called the transitivity of identity. It said that if x is identical with y and y is identical with z, then x is identical with z. So if we say the hunk's identical to the statue, right? And the vase is identical to the hunk, right? then the statue's got to be identical to the vase. But it looks like it's not. So that would, if we say these three things, we violate the transitivity of identity. That if X is the very same thing as Y and Y is the very same thing as Z, then X and Z must be the very same thing. That's bad. We violate the transitivity of identity. So what do we do here? Well, maybe we should question whether the hunk is identical to the statue. And question whether the vase is identical to the hunk as well. If we question that, we'd be saying there are two separate things there. The hunk is one thing, and the statue is another thing. That makes it kind of crowded in there, right? Two things in the same place at the same time. That's a bit awkward, but maybe that's how it is. Right? So if we block these, or deny these, then we don't violate the transitivity of identity. So that'd be one approach, is to deny the identity of the hunk of matter on the statue, and of the vase and the statue. Say that they're not identical. Say something like the matter of the vase is the hunk of metal, and the matter of the statue is the hunk of metal. But the statue is not the very same thing as the hunk of metal. It's a different object. It has a special structure or form, something like that, which is essential to its existence. So that if you take that away, the statue ceases to exist, even though the hunk of metal continues. So that'd be one argument, that the hunk of metal could continue to exist while the statue is destroyed, if you assume that when you melt the hunk of metal, the statue is destroyed, and likewise for the vase. That could lead us to say that these identities don't really hold. But then we have two things in the same place at the same time. So that's a problem. One could try to make a case on either side. It's okay to have lots of things in the same place at the same time. Is there any other alternative to saying that? Well, we could say instead that the statue and the vase are both identical with the hunk of metal, but that the statue and the vase aren't objects in and of themselves, or rather that we have a hunk of metal which has different qualities at different times. Those qualities can change. So the very same hunk of metal could be a vase at one time and a statue at another time. So we could say at one time the hunk of metal is statuesque, and at another time it's vase-shaped, the same hunk of metal. We could deny that the statue and the vase exist as objects at all, apart from the hunk of metal. It's just the hunk of metal that exists, which can be statuesque at one time and vase-shaped at another time. And that being statuesque is an accidental, changeable property. When that property changes or is lost, nothing goes out of existence. And when the hunk of metal acquires the quality of being vase-shaped, nothing comes into existence. It's just that the hunk of metal is there and changes its shape and has these different qualities at different times. then we'd avoid saying that there's more than one thing in that place. It's just a hunk of metal. Sometimes the hunk of metal has this shape, sometimes it has that shape, same hunk of metal all the way through. The other way is to say that the statue and the vase are separate entities from each other and from the hunk of metal, and that being a statue is an essential quality of a statue, which and being a vase is an essential property of a vase. These objects, the vase and the statue, are separate from the hunk of metal. The hunk of metal bears some intimate relation to them. They wouldn't exist without it, yet they exist over and above the piece of metal. So those seem to be our two main alternatives with respect to this conundrum. So if there aren't any further questions, I'm going to stop at this point and resume on Thursday. That sound good? Okay. So see if I can sign off here.